I was about to sit down and film my weekly wrap-up, but it looks like I'm not going to do that because Gumbo has claimed the chair. I think I will have to wait till after they have their lunch. Hello and welcome back to Read Becca for my weekly chatty catch-up on everything that I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading. And I'm finally going to get fully caught up on that chat because I have been having to chunk up my books, and I finally only finished 2 books this week, and I had 1 remaining to catch up on. So let's start with the catch-up book, and that was Sure I'll Join Your Cult by Maria Bamford, which I read on audiobook, read by the author / comedian Maria Bamford, and I enjoyed it, but with very mixed feelings. So this is a memoir-ish. Maria Bamford is a comedian who talks very much about mental health and is very open and direct in that commentary, and has been through some pretty extreme mental health issues and episodes, including institutionalization. And the first part of this book, right when you're beginning, it is almost incoherent, and it very much feels like someone having a mental break on the page. So even as a major fan of Bamford's work and comedy, this was a bit much. I almost gave up on it. It did find its way toward a more traditional memoir, though, and more of what I expect from Bamford's sort of sense of humor. But that first bit was very, very extreme. A lot of discussion of general psychosis, of self-harm topics, all the way up to and including choosing to end one's life, topics about that. And it wasn't really funny either. So once we get past that part, I would say around the 20% mark, it does get into more standard day-to-day, the experiences that Maria is having as a comedian, having to travel, having to work, working on her show Lady Dynamite. And we're getting those standard memoir bits about her life and experiences, including very strong themes of mental health, but in a much more manageable and processable way. And she is still talking about really heavy, difficult topics, including the ones I mentioned, but it's a little less vomiting mental trauma onto the page. So I did really enjoy the most part of this book. But I would say going into this, like, even if you're a fan of Maria Bamford, go in prepared for something pretty extreme. I would say if you're not a fan already of Bamford, probably a starting point is Lady Dynamite, her Netflix show, because that is her but filtered through a writer's room, basically. So it's a little easier and more palatable to jump in to those heavy topics that she covers, and it has her sense of humor. Then go to her comedy. Her comedy is great and much less filtered. And after those things, if you've tried those and you're like, okay, I have steeled myself up for this, then try this book. But I do love Bamford's unusual voice, both literal, her voice and speech is very unusual, but her unusual voice as a comedian, I have always enjoyed her way of talking about mental health and the way that she tackles those topics. But yeah, this was not entirely 100% for me. I'm kind of surprised this actually made it to publication as is. I think that many of those topics were not what I expected as well, just because it's called Sure I'll Join Your Cult. She doesn't really talk about cults very much. There's a real short bit where she kind of talks about being susceptible to cults because of these mental health issues that she has, and that she is very vulnerable to people who would prey on her. And I think that's a good topic to cover. But then she kind of goes the route of like self-help and 12-step programs even, fitting into the same predatory behavior and how she benefits from 12-step programs, but also gets very caught up in them, and they can be predatory to her. So that was much more what she was talking about, was like her engagement with these types of groups that have very clearly defined roles for her to play, and sets of ideals that she needs to follow in order to benefit herself. And sometimes that works for her, and sometimes it doesn't. And so that was, I think, the biggest part of the book, which is not really what I felt like I was sort of sold. But I did like hearing her perspective on those topics because they're not something I have any experience with. So yeah, hearing about her experiences of self-improvement through 12-step programs and the benefits she has seen and the difficulties she's had with them. And then also, seeing her struggle with things like institutionalization and trying to go about her job through mental illness were very valuable things to hear. So overall, it was a mixed experience, as I said up front. The next one that I read was an ebook that has been lingering on for a bit. I read Morcster Chef, Cleaver's Edge by Actus. And this is ostensibly a lit RPG, which means it has some video game-like elements in the book. But this was like barely their lit RPG. We occasionally get little stat printouts, very rarely, like every couple chapters maybe, I think. So I think if you are new to lit RPG, this would be a very easy one to go in without it sort of being overly intrusive into the book. But this is kind of what it sounds like from the title. It is high fantasy about an orc chef who is in a very traditional high fantasy world that's not fleshed out too terribly much. You are expected to go in sort of knowing what the boilerplate standard high fantasy world is and the kind of races that are there. Because he is an orc, our main character, Eric, is expected to be a monster. In this world, it's very much the sort of old school Tolkien. The bad guys, the monsters, can only be monsters. They don't have a sort of deeper sentience, sapience, whatever. They are not thinking, feeling individuals. The orcs and goblins and whatnot of this world are purely monsters, and everybody knows that. So all of these people are having their preconceptions thrown for a loop as soon as they see this orc who not only isn't really a monster, but he can talk. So that's a big deal as well in this. So there's this divide, and he unfoots people everywhere he goes because of that, and it really surprises them. But even more, he surprises them because he is a chef. He's not this big, mean brute that they all expect him to be. He loves to cook, and he very frequently winds up getting into unexpected cooking duels, I guess. Not a ton of times, but it happens multiple times over the course of this rather long book. It's about 400 pages. And so yeah, he finds himself surprising the people around him and showing that he's more than they expect. And I love that concept of somebody being very different than people's preconceptions as a character. And I think that just made him someone I very much wanted to like and get behind. So at the start of the book, we kind of see him immediately run into an adventurer who is willing to go with the fact that he is not a monster and appreciate that he can cook right away because this person is very hungry. And so he winds up joining their adventuring band. And that is the main driving force of this story, is he joins along with this band of adventurers. He has a lot of opportunities to cook, and one of the main draws is that he's going to be able to find rare food items in the dungeons that they go into for questing, basically. And so all of these are very standard fantasy tropes, and so that isn't really what makes it special so much as the fact that it's just fun and like a really charming, delightful adventure with a lot of cooking. They are seeing as they go, or very, very near the beginning, you learn the first dungeon that they go into, things are strange and unusual in the dungeons. And there have been rumors about things going on, and that does run as a through line through here. So there are weird things afoot in the dungeons, and that continues along. But that's not like a prominent thing. I'm assuming that's going to get bigger as the series goes on. There are, I believe, 3 books out now in this series, and I'm just so delighted that I finally picked it up because it has so much heart in this group of characters banding together and them immediately being on his side, on Eric's side, and having his back when other people come up against them for them hanging out with an orc, basically. Them winning people over through food and cooking, and him being able to share the skill that he has that no one expects him to. So it just has such a charming premise, and it wasn't like the best book I've ever read, but I had such a great time with it. Every time I would set it down, I like wanted to get right back to it. And unfortunately, I kept having to set it down to prioritize other things because I was just sort of meant to be reading this in the background. And then I would just fly through every time I picked it up because it was such a good time to read. So just very true, wonderful, entertaining read that I had a wonderful time with. And lastly, I read this week Something Wild and Wonderful by Anita Kelly, and I picked this up because Shannon from That So Po had talked about it at the end of November because she picked it up for November. And I had such a great time with this as well. It was probably a highlight of my romance reading this year. This is such a sweet, quiet book, very literally. It's about falling in love in the silences, because we're following two men, Alexei and Ben, in alternating perspectives as they're hiking the Pacific Crest Trail along the west coast of the US. And this is thousands of miles through both deserts and fording rivers at times, and then going into mountains and snow as you head up toward Canada. And so they each have planned this out very heavily, and they are separate hikers at the beginning of this, but they run into each other somewhat randomly. In the opening scene, there's a snake, and that's what connects them, and they wind up hiking together for a little while. And as I said, it's them falling in love in the silences, them being able to just be quiet and at peace with each other, and not interacting and feeling comfortable with that, feeling natural together. And that felt so true to me, because that's what like my closest relationships and even friendships are, where there's someone I can be quiet with, and it's not awkward and it's not uncomfortable, and you just feel almost that sense of home when you're with that person in silence. And I loved that. Both of them are going through what I would consider are kind of major transitional periods in their lives for different reasons, and they are spending a lot of time introspecting. So that plays a part in why they're being so quiet, because a lot of this trail journey for each of them is about the internalization that they're doing. And so on top of that, you know, they're connecting over these things and figuring out how much to open up about what their journey on the trail is about with each other. And I thought that part was just so beautiful and peaceful, and the solitude of it, being out in this wildlife setting and running into people who are mostly good, kind people who feel genuine toward each other, was so wonderful and just charming to read. There are some harder elements, and they made these characters feel so real. I felt like, so Alexei is going through a bad situation, dealing with some homophobia and a really negative coming out experience. And he came from a religious background, so that him feeling very disconnected from his past community, from everything he has known in his life prior, is what really he's grappling with internally and trying to figure out who he wants to be in the future. And so that is like a really big topic to even think about. And you know, meanwhile, Ben, our other character, he is so focused on enjoying and taking this genuine pleasure out of the trail, out of the experience. And he is so boisterous and excited about this, while Alexei is very guarded, and he's been through clear trauma. And so there are such polar opposites as characters. Ben just feels open on page at basically all moments, and is unguarded with every person that they meet. And he's been training to be a nurse, so you can see that side of his personality come through very strongly in all of those aspects. And he doesn't know entirely what's going on with Alexei, but just like has a intuition as a result of that personality aspect of how he needs to kind of handle him with care and protection, protect him emotionally, I would say. And yet they slowly start sort of falling for each other, or not even slowly, they pretty quickly start falling for each other, but they're both in such a tenuous position that they really do take their time and spend that time getting to know each other. And yeah, I just thought it was very believable. I thought they were whole people, and even one of the greatest things in romance, or really any book, but specifically romance, you get all of these little side characters that they encounter, whether on the trail or in other scenes elsewhere. And every single person they encounter, you can tell, has a whole life and backstory, and you can see the author spinning off to a whole other book with all of these characters. So when that happens, you can tell like it's an author who really is doing a great job crafting people, whole, fully formed people who have their own lives and backgrounds. And I felt that with every single person we encountered here. And I really have at least 2 or 3 that I am hoping we get other books for. So I haven't read the prior book in this series, Love and Other Disasters. And it was like not even on my radar as something I would be interested in when it first came out and kind of was hyped. It looked to me, very generic. But I do believe there are characters in this that are crossover are from that book, and I had more recently heard some specifics about it that made me much more intrigued. So I don't know if it will be my very favorite thing, but I really need to go back and definitely read that, because Anita Kelly seems to be writing really great characters and great stories. So I need to go back and check out their debut novel. So I think that is it for the books that I read this week. For what I'm reading, holiday romance. So I think Once Upon a December by Amy E. Reichert, maybe a Brigadoon retelling. Now that I've started looking at it, so I picked this up basically just because it was a holiday romance and it has something to do with a winter market and a baker. And so that was like it, but it sounds like it may be a contemporary Brigadoon retelling. So that one is a priority to read this weekend, certainly, because the obvious looming holiday. And the other one is Paladin of Souls by Lois McMaster Bujold, which I want to finish by the end of the year, not necessarily this weekend, but I do want to wrap that one up before the year ends, so I close off the year without that still on my currently reading, because I've been actively reading that for a couple months, I think, or inactively reading for a couple months. So I think that's it for books. I haven't finished anything else I was watching or watched any more Christmas movies because everything has been very busy. I did succeed at getting all of my Christmas presents wrapped and off mailed in time, because most of my Christmas presents are shipping. My whole family is thousands of miles away. Thursday, I had finished all of that and I was like, okay, next thing to get done is baking and Christmas cards for the neighbors. And so at 10 o'clock at night on Thursday, I was like, why am I doing this? I'm baking at 10 o'clock at night. But so that was the last like feeling overwhelmed day, I think, where I was just trying to get everything done. And now that's done. We're now done with all the major stuff with the house. I think that was a little while ago, that maybe a week ago, to get it back in order, because I just had my flurry done, if you missed all the videos recently. But everything is pretty back to usable. The books are mostly back. These shelves are still slowly getting to where they should be, but the other shelves in this room are almost entirely back to filled, and I'm oddly having trouble actually fitting all my books. Whoops. My Christmas stuff, though, was still the massive confusion. Today, I finally was able to get my office back to mostly usable, because it was like half piles of stuff that needed to be organized still from the flooring, and half was boxes, packages that needed to be wrapped, wrapping paper, all of the stuff for wrapping. And so all of that now has been put away again. So my office is a little bit closer to being 100%. I still have some junk I need to decide whether I'm keeping or getting rid of, and sift through and get it organized a bit. But it's mostly an actual room now instead of just piles of crap. So that has been the main part of my week, has been just completing all the stuff I needed to ahead of Christmas as the deadline, and now starting to complete actually getting the minor stuff from my house being in chaos back to normal. So we're mostly getting there. I still have an awful lot of boxes piled around here, but otherwise it is a functional room in here for the most part. And I haven't even started looking to get, like, I need a new couch because I got rid of my couch, but that will certainly happen after the holiday and the new year. And I'm just looking forward really to this weekend of quiet and reading and Christmas food, too much, I'm sure. So I think that is just about everything for me. The one thing I wanted to recommend in the deluge of videos, I'm trying to catch up with all the videos and whatnot. Everybody's got loads out still. I'm still desperately behind, as I said last week. But I'm actually going to recommend kind of a holiday themed video that's not related to BookTube, because I think I recommended it last week and it actually got cut out on accident. If I am recommending this for the second time, just ignore me. I'm having a really terrible time with my brain being mush right now, because I am very tired still, and I'm having terrible deja vu, I assume, as a result of that. So everything feels like I've already said it before, even if I haven't. But regardless, I will recommend this. It's from Religion for Breakfast, a kind of investigative, I would say. I don't know, it's history focused. It very much looks at pulling the details and facts that we can about a religious topic. and then presenting a video essay on it. They have had some great holiday themed video essays recently, and so I want to recommend you go watch their video on the history of the Christmas tree as sort of a holiday trend in modern times, because I enjoyed it very much and I learned a lot from it. So I think that's it for me for this week. I will, of course, be back soon with more things, and all of the exciting end of year and start of year stuff will be coming very quickly. But for now, I just want to wish you a happy holiday, whether you are celebrating Christmas or any other holiday. Most of us in the world at least have a wonderful holiday weekend, extended weekend from work, where we can spend that time reading. So I wish you a wonderful holiday weekend full of joy and reading, and hopefully some good times and good food. Thank you so very much for watching.